So today we're going to be using this bar stock, which is 1045. Reason we're using this and not reforging out a leaf spring or something like that is because with this we know what it is. There's known specs on it. We can go out and we know how to heat treat it. We don't need to do any guesswork. Also, it's available in bar stock like this, which makes it so much easier to actually get the shapes that we're looking for, rather than having something that's perhaps not quite right and you've got to reforge the shape before you actually are able to start making the knife. So for the price of this, I would highly recommend just going out, grab yourself a bar of known steel, and it'll make your life so much easier when doing a project like this. So the first thing we're going to do is create a set down here. So we want to push most of the bar stock down this way and the rest of it out this way. What that will do is it will create the little kind of L section at the end, which will then be drawn out and become our handle. Because we're going to be forging quite a lot of this material, we want to have it really nice and hot before we actually start the forge. So we're going to bring it out at a really nice bright yellow sort of colour, just going into white. So it's not quite burning, but almost getting there. With that heat, because it was quite a lot of forging, I wanted to make sure that I was that I had a lot of heat in there the entire time I was forging. So as soon as it got down to like a dull orange, there's no point in working myself ragged trying to move that much material. So instead, I just put it back in the fire and got some more heat back in it. So this is after 2 heats, I think, and this is what we're looking for. Just getting this kind of set down in here. This will become like the heel of the blade, and this will become the handle. Because we're going to be drawing out this material to probably about that long, we don't need to worry about this being a perfectly even taper all the way through right now. We'll get onto that in a minute. At the moment, we just want to get this looking, well, get this forged out and move as much material as possible, as quickly as possible, so we're not spending the entire time getting a really nice perfect taper that's only this long. We want to get it nice and long, then worry about getting it perfect. The technical side of this is easy, it's the physical side. When you're forging out something like this, obviously you're compressing it between the hammer and the anvil, so it's going to move in every direction other than where it's being compressed. So it's going to squirt out this way, which is what we want, but it's also going to come out of the sides, so this is going to get thicker. So you need to make sure that every time you're forging down one way, turn it and forge it down the other. We're actually trying to create a taper that goes all the way down through in both directions, so we need to make sure that that's consistent all the way down through. So you're going to need to forge a little bit more down here than you are up here. Otherwise you're going to end up with just a very long, thin rectangle. So one of the other reasons we're using bar stock is because when you're forging it and you're really wailing on it, it means you can get a good grip rather than using tongs. You will have to use tongs even with this project and one that's as simple as this, but again, if you can remove those factors, the like added difficulties of having to deal with tongs, then it just makes this project a much easier thing to kind of have a go at as your first kind of project. The only difficulty with this is the fact that this will slowly heat up. Steel's not actually a very good conductor of heat, but even when this is glowing white, it can still be quite cool down here. But it is getting a little bit warm, so just remember to quench it off every now and then. And you want to try and make sure you do that before it gets really hot, otherwise you risk putting stress fractures into it. So now I've got the taper established, I've just been going down through with some lighter blows at a lower heat just to smooth everything over, making sure I'm not doing big forging blows, just kind of planishing just to smooth everything out. And now that I've got kind of a nice point on it, what I'm going to do is go down again at quite a low heat and just take off all the corners. That means that A, it looks a little bit nicer, and it's also much more comfortable in the hand as well. So when you bend that round into your handle, it's a comfy thing to hold rather than these sharp corners sticking into your hand. So when you're putting the curlicue on the end, it's just a very, very small amount over the edge of the anvil. Really gently knock it down and then flip it, and you kind of brush it back towards you. You're not hammering down on it, you're literally just brushing it back, just encouraging it to do a nice kind of organic curl. If you hit it too hard, what ends up happening is you get a very sharp corner, and we're trying to make it into an organic little curl. So just get a little bit more heat, just bring that around a bit further. So now we've got the curlicue established, what we're going to do is put a bend in around here, about halfway along, and that's going to, curl around and become the handle. It can be a bit tricky getting this right. You can adjust it a little bit, but if you get to a certain point and go, oh, I need more length on either side, normally it's best just to flatten it all back out and just start again. If you try altering it halfway along the bend, you can get into some real trouble with it. So until you're a bit more experienced, maybe just try straightening back out and starting over again. You'll notice as you start knocking this down, not only will it bend in the way you want, but it will start to wander off to one side, and you need to make sure you keep on track of that and bring it back to the flat of the anvil and keep straightening it back up, because you're trying to bend something that's a rectangle but also over an asymmetrical cone. It will want to just twist off to one side because it's going for the path of least resistance. So you just need to make sure you bring it to the flat of the anvil, have the peak up in the air, and just knock down on top of it. I'm going to leave it a little bit open. That's going to allow us a bit more room when we're actually forging out the blade. If we were to close the handle all the way up, then we run the risk of damaging the curlicue and the handle itself as we're bringing the blade shape out. So when you're using a hot cut like this, it's important to reset the piece on the hot cut every time. If you just try and wail on it willy-nilly, then what happens is you end up with the stock jumping on the hot cut. You end up with multiple cuts into it then, and we want to try and avoid that. We want to have one nice clean cut all the way through. Otherwise you'll end up with cold cuts all the way along your spine, which is something we really want to try and avoid. So whenever you're using a hot cut like this, you want to try and avoid cutting all the way through on the actual hot cut with the hammer, because it will damage the tool and your hammer and normally send the stock flying off into the distance. Instead, just grab a tong and just wiggle it until it comes free. So now that we've got this cut off, you might be wondering why we've cut it this way and not down like that, because that would make it instantly look more knife shaped. Where we cut it here, obviously there's lots of little imperfections, so we want to bend that back so it's on the spine of the blade rather than on the actual cutting edge. That's even more important if this was a laminate or a Damascus billet or something like that. It just means that we've got a really nice clean grain all along the cutting edge. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to heat this whole thing up. I'm going to push this part of the knife up around here to become the tip, and this will then become a nice flat spine, and all of this will become the blade edge. So back in the fire. These tongs. After bending the tip round, you'll find that it's actually quite short, but as we start to create this distal taper along here and start to just taper in a little bit for bevels, it will actually extend quite a lot. So it will get a little bit longer. This is about halfway through the process now, so I'll get a little bit longer again, and I'm just going to be forging back down on here and pushing the material out this way and along, so we get that nice slender kind of sleek look to it. So one of the things you're going to notice is as you start forging down this area, the entire blade is going to start to kind of banana up. But as you then forge the distal taper along the spine, it will straighten up as well. So there's going to be a little bit of back and forth, and if it ever gets a little bit too much and you have a kind of a wallow in this area, you can turn it on its spine and knock down on the blade edge. So you knock down here with this against the anvil, and that will keep that line nice and straight.
It's just a taper.
So I'm just closing up the final loop and just taking it very, very gently, just trying to make sure that the curly Q goes down past the heel of the knife. So I want to keep the bend up here so that it just gently goes down like that. So a bit more heat up here, and that should go down in nicely. So on this final heat, you want to try and keep the heat back here, and we're just going to try and push this curly Q down past the heel. And just being really gentle and allowing it to kind of bend into place. So we've got something like that. And just try and keep the line central all the way down through the handle. One of the final things to do before you heat treat this blade is to put your touch mark on it. So that could be something really simple, like just a geometric design, or it could be some letter stamps with your initials in. It's a really important thing to do. It's kind of like a blacksmith signature. And you want to mark it. You want to be able to say in 15, 20 years time, like you can recognize that as your work because it's got your touch mark in it. It's one of those things that your first knife will haunt you for years to come. You might as well embrace it. So all the forge work on the blade is now finished, and the final thing that we're going to do is we've just straightened it, made sure it's all nice and true. So now we need to actually heat treat it to make it from a knife-shaped object to an actual knife. The first part of that is to get it up to critical temperature, which again, depending on which type of steel you use, is different. But because we're using quite a forgiving steel, we're going to base it on color rather than exact temperature. So you don't need to worry about any heat treating ovens or kilns or digital thermometers or anything like that. We can literally just do this by color. So we're going to get it up to about an orangey sort of color, just like maybe a mid to bright orange, and take it over to the water and then quench it into that. That will harden the steel, and then once that's done, we're going to look at tempering it, and we'll temper it again just over the flames of the forge. Once we've done the quench, the next task is to temper the knife. What we're going to do is use the colours of the steel to determine what temperature it's at. So we want to be tempering it at around 220 degrees Celsius, which is 450 in Fahrenheit. And to do that, we're going to use the heat of the forge to heat the handle and the spine of the knife. We're going to get that to kind of a blue sort of colour, but we're going to be watching the edge of the blade the whole time to make sure that it doesn't go past that wet straw colour. That's the colour that we're looking for, so we can get that wet straw all the way along the blade nice and evenly. That's perfect. If the handle and spine go blue, that's fine. We don't mind if they're soft. It's the edge that we want to keep an eye on, and you don't want that to go past straw. You want to keep it nice and golden in colour, and you should have a good knife after that.
So after all that, the final thing to do is to grind the edge. On this one, I'm using the platen to grind the bevel and then slowly walk it back until I get the desired bevel thicknesses. And in terms of what edge you do, that's entirely up to you. I normally put a scander grind on it, but it's also a really good opportunity to try other types of grinds. So you can do like a hollow grind or something on it if that's what you want to try. So in summary, this is a really great way of honing those basic blacksmithing skills that will really make a difference in any of your bladesmithing. Try it out for yourself. Make these in any size you want, whether it's a tiny little neck knife or all the way up to like a full-size kitchen knife version. Do 100 of them and it'll really pay off when you move on to more complex blade forgings.